Namaste. Welcome all to the second session of Candid Convos, a thought leadership initiative of LeadFac Solutions. In today's session, we are privileged to have Ross Thornley with us. Ross is a leading thought maker on adaptability. He is co-founder and CEO of AQai, the world's largest community of adaptability certified coaches. Through his insights, Ross has been helping and inspiring various leaders and teams to future-proof their organization and make them ready for changes and navigate disruptions with ease and comfort. In addition to leading AQai, Ross is also the host of podcast series Decoding AQ, in which he is engaging with CEOs and thought leaders across the world on the science and practice of adaptability. Ross is serving as member of board and advisor for various innovative companies. He has written best-selling books Decoding AQ and Moonshot Innovation. In today's session, we are going to discuss about his book Decoding AQ and various other interesting aspects about AQ with the AQ guy directly. Thank you, Ross.
Wow. Thank you, Ramesh. I'm genuinely excited to hang out. Second episode on your show. So I feel truly honored. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ross. We heard a lot about IQ, EQ, and also SQ, spirituality quotient. What is this AQ, Ross?
So in our context, it's about our adaptability quotient. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of these things, right? A lot of these measures, what are they and why are they important? And really for us, the creation of this was around the need to ensure no one's left behind. We're recognizing that the world is moving so fast, especially the world of work, and it is how we respond to change and how we can improve that skill of our adaptability individually and as teams and as a whole organization. So it's a measure of three components: how and to what degree do I adapt, and we call that our AQ ability. It also looks at who adapts and why, and that's our AQ character. And then when does somebody adapt? So we might have these skills, we might have these characteristics, but what's our environment? And all of those make up our model of AQ.
Right. So no one is left behind. That's a very noble thought.
Well, that's what we're working towards anyway. Yeah.
Oh, yes, of course, yes. See, and I have also read very interesting thing about AQ in your book. Like adaptability is like a muscle, and you said like with the training and focus, you can improve and strengthen it. That's a bit interesting, Ross. Can you please share some insights?
Yeah, sure. And I think one of the challenges that we've recognized in having lots of conversations with leaders and organizations is they don't have a language for change, right? They use different words at different points. Some of them have different interpretations. And so, as I mentioned, our model, this ACE, ability, character, and environment, is our model of adaptability. And if we think about those five abilities: grit, mental flexibility, our mindset, our resilience, and our ability to unlearn, these are really developable skills. So a bit like your muscles, you can go to the gym, work them out, put them under stress, and we can improve them. We can also overdevelop them, overwork them. We need to have rest around them. The same is true for a lot of these cognitive abilities of perhaps if we've got overdeveloped grit applied in the wrong areas, it could show up and contribute to things like burnout, for example. I'm so passionate, I persevere at all costs, and it affects my physical health. Things like
and
our
also
resilience.
teams. And also teams.
And also
teams
teams.
also. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our resilience, again, is like a muscle. It can get trained so that we can recover from challenges faster and perhaps with less support. But if we use that muscle too much, it can become depleted. So we need to build on that and recover our resilience through different practices and different interventions, training and things. So that way we use the analogy of like muscles, because we can understand that those skills can develop. Same is sort of true in terms of our environment as well. Things like our work stress or our psychological safety. How are we training that environment to make it foster great adaptations that are intentional?
Okay, great. So you also wrote about an interesting aspect, amygdala hijack. See, how does this impact physical health and mental health, and of course our relationship, Ross? How it impacts?
Yeah, it's interesting. And when I wrote the book, and it was the second time I wrote the book, I was in two ways about writing about the amygdala hijack, because in some circles, you say the word and you get a sigh from people, because they go, "Oh, I've heard that before." And really, it is so vitally important to understand this and how it affects our cognitive abilities and our ability to adapt. So the amygdala hijack is when our brain's fear center takes over. So you might have heard of it, of, fight or flight, or
Yep.
freeze.
Yep.
And that response is even in non-threatening, non-life-threatening situations, like perhaps in the context of work, giving a presentation or maybe receiving critical feedback. So when that happens repeatedly, we get these stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline flood our system. So physically, this can, in effect, shrink our brain function. What it does is it impairs our cognitive abilities and our prefrontal cortex. So it impairs things like sleep, our immunity, our energy. Mentally, it can affect our mood, our creativity, our decision making. Even in relationships, it can cause perhaps overreactions or a disconnection. So the danger is that we stay stuck in this state too long. It undermines our health, undermines leadership, and ultimately our ability to adapt. So that first step is recognizing this hijack, this stress response, and we can begin to then improve our adaptability intelligence. So to put that in context of change, and maybe an analogy, for example, if our AQ, our adaptability intelligence, is all about how we respond to change, challenge and uncertainty, when we're in this amygdala hijack state, that adaptability intelligence drops. We're reacting from fear, not responding with intention. So high AQ means that we notice that stress response. We would then perhaps pause and we would choose a better response. I worked with a senior leader who often, when they were under this amygdala hijack, their symptoms that would show up would be micromanagement. So every time the team faced sort of tight deadlines, she would recognize this, and her, stress response hijacked her. What we worked with was learning some very simple practices, some breath work, reframing the situation so that she could delegate with more trust. And the result, after a bit of time, it was a calmer team. There was better results. Her own well-being improved. And that's really AQ in action.
Okay. So that's how AQ is very important to prevent an hijack.
Well, it won't necessarily prevent it, because that's going to happen. That's a biological response when we're under pressure. What we need to be able to do is recognize that and not be consumed or owned by it. If it's too much, too long, we get chronic disease. At certain times, being hijacked in that's great. That gets us into a very quick adaptation response. Run, fight, get away. In a lot of work contexts, that's not super helpful, not helpful for learning, not helpful for creative problem solving, not helpful for collaboration. So what we need to do with AQ is recognize it happens, put some interventions in place. So things like breath work, things like pausing, things like time in sessions to allow somebody to just settle. I remember speaking to somebody who used adult tantrums as a way of managing the amygdala hijack. So rather than just trying to sweep it under the carpet and saying, oh, you've just got to deal with it, or go and meditate, or these types of things, when you have it, the body needs to get rid of some of those chemicals. If you see in animals, like we have 2 dogs, if they get a stressful situation, they'll have a tremor and they'll shake. So an adult tantrum can be a great way of, I've just had a really bad, meeting, really bad phone call, really bad feedback. And I physically do some fast movements, do some shaking around, and then afterwards, then breathe and say, I am safe. I am safe. I am safe. And that adult tantrum can just reestablish our chemistry, one that is then able to problem solve, able to learn, able to respond, not react.
Wow, fantastic. So in the adaptability pyramid of needs, you are telling about, harnessing the 3 forces at the bottom of the pyramid as the foundation. Can you please elaborate on that 3 aspects?
Yeah, and this was inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I thought, well, let's create an adaptability pyramid of needs. And at the very bottom is really looking at understanding how, why, and when you adapt. So those are those 3 forces from our ACE model: ability, character, and environment. So if we don't understand them, we can't harness them. And I can run through a couple of the other bits because we talked about the amygdala hijack. That's the next place on the pyramid from the bottom. So once we've understood our how, why, and when we adapt with our assessment and our report, we then need to get to a state of physical unity between our mind and body so that we're not captured by our body's reactions. So we're in a state of coherence, so we can silence perhaps some of the responses to our amygdala hijack. Then as we go through, we start shedding the link between our job role and our identity so that we can decouple ourselves from that identity, freedom to imagine, freedom to let go. And it goes into various other parts of remodeling. So this from reaction to response, then releasing from self-judgment, forward thinking, enhancing with rapid feedback loops, then being peaceful in paradox, the dualities of life. And then we get to this transcendence of transformation where we're fearless and deliberate in our adaptation. So that was a quick run through of the pyramid of needs, but it all starts with harnessing those 3 forces of ability, character, and environment.
Great. And you also given, 9 steps in the pyramid. It's a 9-step pyramid. Yeah, that's, lot of.
Well, I believe in 3s, the power of 3s. So many things happen in that way.
See, and one of the core tenets of AQ is shifting from reacting to responding during change. And you also given a very beautiful analogy, simple analogy of changing gears when you travel in a car. How important is it, coming to neutral and then going up? Ross, that's what you mentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's quite easy to say, it's easy to read, it's easy to hear, but it's hard to do in practice, right? Okay. To shift from this reaction to response, especially when it's more challenging to our values, to our beliefs, to the way we've done things before. We might react, we might want to protect it, we might want to dig in because we've had some form of applause before, rather than responding. So if you imagine a car driving forward at speed, let's say that's 10 miles an hour, and we suddenly want to go to a new direction, we want to shift that direction. That direction could be a new perspective shift, or it could be a new behavior, it could be a new piece of software. And let's say that was a 180, we're putting it into reverse. If we went straight into reverse, we would probably damage the gearbox, right? Yep. Because we're traveling at 10 miles an hour. It might not completely wreck it, but what we would have to do is put it into neutral. We would have to put it into neutral, perhaps even stop the movement, what we're currently doing, to then embrace the new direction, the new perspective, the new response. Imagine now if we're traveling at 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour, and we suddenly asked somebody, I need you to change the way you're doing something. And they're so wedded to it because they've got the belief, they have the values, they
Right.
have the applause. It's like going 100 miles an hour. So we have to pause, stop. We have to go into neutral so that we can then even see that there are other gears. There's a reverse, there's a second, there's a third, there's a fifth. And so that moment of pause, that moment of space allows us to look beyond the navel, to expand our horizons, to see new directions, new perspective, new opportunities. So that's why I've used that analogy of the gear shifting in terms of perspectives, behaviors, that it's so important that we recognize you can't just go from one thing to the next without a pause and without going into neutral before we can observe that there are new directions and new opportunities.
Yeah. See, and transforming from setbacks to springboards. You mentioned about 4 R's in the book, Ross.
Yeah,
That's
so
very interesting. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of alliteration, and I personally like thinking frameworks, things that people can remember and practice. And this is inspired in part by Buddhist philosophy. And I've got sort of 4 R's to transform those setbacks into springboards. And it's recognize, reflect, reimagine, and respond. So what we've already been talking about uncovers this a little bit, but let me just walk you through a little bit step by step. So recognizing. So this is to acknowledge that you're not the setback. So language is really important. Often people will use a language to label the setback of themselves, i.e., I'm a failure, I've failed, versus I'm an active observer of failure. So I can decouple the emotions, the what I'm recognizing from me and become the observer of it. So to recognize, acknowledge that I am not that setback. Okay, so I'm an active observer of what I'm sensing, what emotions are in there, rather than that label is me. The second part then is to reflect. So if we think that reflection is now going into neutral. So if recognize is actually stopping, it's the pausing. The reflection is going into neutral. So on the event and ask what led to that setback. So I start to reflect on it. So I take some ownership of my mental health. I reset my mindset through curiosity, through finding gratitude, that I can reflect and shift from being the victim to being in control, because I'm recognizing and now I'm reflecting on what part did I play. I own my own experience. I own my own emotions. That's not someone else's. They might influence it, but I own that. So reflect on it, what led to that setback, and take ownership of my mental health, reset it, and frame through gratitude. Only then are we able to see those new directions. So imagine now we're in the neutral and the gearbox and we see, wow, I didn't even realize there was a reverse or a 5th gear or a 4th gear. And that's where we can reimagine. So this is step 3. So with intentional ideas, looking forwards, not backwards. And that's key. Often when we reimagine, what we're doing is revisiting. We're going into blame. We're revisiting what happened. We do that during reflection. We take ownership, but now we reimagine. And that is always forward looking. So that's about practicing foresight. So what new ideas are now available thanks to that gift of what happened to me, my ability to reflect? Can I create new goals? Can I create new strategies? Can I create new capabilities when I reimagine with intentionality looking forwards? And finally, then step 4 is the response. So I can then take deliberate action and deliberate steps towards those new opportunities, towards those new goals. So I can consider, where do I stop? What do I pause? What do I start that will serve my new vision and my new goals? So that's recognize, reflect, reimagine, and respond. And that is the way we can convert these setbacks, a ball and chain, into a springboard that actually elevates us to a better future.
Wow. So self-awareness is the key for all these things, right, Ross? People should be recognize.
It is. And I think self-awareness is, a duality. It's a paradox, right? So we can build a level of self-awareness, but we're still inside our own system. So Gödel's law is, you can't see the label of your own jam jar when you're inside the jam jar. So when I talked about recognizing and encouraging people to be the observer of the emotion, observer of failure rather than I am a failure. When we do that self-awareness, I like to encourage people to think about their future self as an entirely different person. How would they observe you? And that's another step to creating some distance between your current state and future state. And sometimes it also helps self-awareness to use tools like the AQ Me, but also use tools like conversations, other people who see things in different ways. So it's important that self-awareness is a skill. It is not complete by just self-practice. It requires unique perspectives and ability to set outside, become an observer, and at the higher level, do it with others so that they can help bring and see things we can't, right? We're blind to some of the things because we're inside the system.
Correct. 360-degree feedback is also one of the powerful ways of self-awareness, right?
Very much so. Yeah.
You get to know, how we are landing with others.
Yeah.
See, with all the good intent that we may be thinking, but intent is one thing, but impact is the most vital in relationship.
It's a great point.
Right. See, also, another interesting thing you mentioned about the adaptive cycle, where you said, start with thrive, then collapse, survive, then grow, and then once again get into the cycle, adaptive cycle.
It's to me, it's like life, right? Life is just transfer of energy into different expressions, so our soul expression of light as it comes through, that would be thriving. So if I walk you through these, what I call the 4 worlds of adaptation, and it is this continual cycle of change through creation and collapse. So thriving, when I describe that and what I mean by that, is a complete system harmony. So it's humanity abundance. Often we might see pockets of thriving. We might see one company thriving, but not every company in that industry. We might see one person in the family thriving, not everybody. One person in the community, not everybody. Or a proportion of the community, maybe not everybody. So to me, true thriving is this abundance that humanity exists, all of this flourishing, thriving system. Now, what often happens between there and collapse is a destructive disruption. And essentially, that's a failure to adapt. So that destructive disruption might be, I lose my job, right, as an individual. It might be that my product is usurped by a new enter to the market, a new technology. That destructive disruption is a failure to adapt by those that were currently thriving, and it then risks going into collapse. So that's a system failure, a death, right? Now, sometimes that can be good if it's on our terms. If we decide to collapse something no longer serving us. Could be a product. Oh, fax machines. Now let's work on something else. What is the next behavior? What's the next process? What's the next skill I need? Now, if I'm in that system failure and death, what I need to get out of that to survive is a creative disruption. So if I'm in this system failure, I need some form of creative disruption, and that takes a mindset shift, and that puts me into survival. And survival is often this sort of coping, it's maintaining, it's sort of a scarcity, it's very short-termism. We see that a lot in politics. Politics is the next 4-year cycle. They don't think in very long term. So it's about coping, it's about maintaining. I just need to get that to the next term to get re-elected. So they're often driven from survival. They're driven from scarcity. To shift from survival to growth, we need a positive disruption. So where we saw a creative disruption that takes us from a collapse to a survival, we'll see then a positive disruption, which again is another mindset shift that will take us into growth. So that growth sort of world is where maybe individuals or teams, or there's some organizational success. We might describe that as competitive advantage.
Mm.
So in growth, we've got a competitive advantage. I have new capabilities. I have new IP. I have new products and services that are valuable in the marketplace. The next part, to go back to our first place where we started of thriving, I need a transformation in my mindset. So I need to shift from competitive to collaborative, from,
Right.
into abundance where the whole of humanity can live in a flourishing, abundant world. Now, there's a couple of extra little elements that we can learn here from our AQ model. Now, we might want to avoid collapse, right? We certainly
Right.
would want
Yes.
to avoid it if it's not on our terms. If we deliberately want to cause the death to something because it no longer serves us, that's fine. But we can avoid it through unlearning, early unlearning. And that's one of our subdimensions. So that's the
Yep.
ability to let go of something that no longer serves us. So that can shift us. Instead of going to the world of collapse, it goes to the world of survival. So we're coping, we're
Mm.
maintaining, we're in this scarcity and short-termism. So that's a sort of shortcut. Think of it like in the game of snakes and ladders. That's a ladder to get us from thriving to survival, avoiding collapse.
Collapse.
Now,
Yeah.
if we want to go the next stage and say, actually, I just want to exist in a little eddy in between thriving and growth, and I want to avoid collapse and I want to avoid survival altogether. Well, that's where high AQ comes in. So we can
Mm.
shift from thriving and avoid potential collapse, avoid survival, and just go straight into the next phase of growth and competitive advantage by having high overall AQ. So we're looking at positive disruptions, we're looking at transformations, so that we're feeding our mindset to be able to early see the foresight of collapse. We can early avoid survival through unlearning, and we can create an environment with psychological safety, with team support, with company support that actually allows us to go in through high AQ to transformations and positive disruptions between growth and thriving.
Great. So the more strong your adaptability muscle is, the more likelihood of you avoiding the collapse and survival, and
Yes.
going directly from thrive to growth, and be in that loop.
And equally, if you find yourself in those, it'll give
Mm.
you the skills and tools to come out of them, right? It might not be intentional to find myself in collapse, but I might
Mm.
find myself in that, right? Could be a regulatory change, could be a geopolitical situation that suddenly collapses that entire job role or job structure. No matter how my IQ was, I couldn't have avoided it because it's happened. But when it happens, how long do I stay in that? Am I in a state of
Mm.
hopelessness, no action, victimhood, or do I use my AQ to crawl my way out through the creative disruptions and positive disruptions to go to survival and growth? So avoid them in the first place, best. If you find yourself in those situations, it helps you come out from them as well.
Great. Like COVID situation,
Yeah,
where it was not in our hands, but we all had to undergo that.
absolutely perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. See, now with all the wisdom that you spoke about, Ross, that you have built into that adaptability quotient assessment, and now coming back to this assessment, like you spoke about ability, character, and environment.
Mhm.
Why these three factors, and what is the science behind it, Ross? Can you please tell us?
Yeah, so I'm a lover of science. It was one of my most enjoyable subjects at school, and I've hung out with a lot of scientists, a lot of professionals,
Mm.
a lot of psychologists. And when we went into designing this model, it was a very much a collaborative approach. I had a vision
Right.
of what I wanted it to achieve and the impact of why, when Mike and I created the business, we wanted to serve people, make sure they're not left behind, help them adapt, provide the skills to do so. We wanted to make sure there was some real scientific rigor behind it. So we collaborated with several universities, professors, leaders in their fields, whether
Mm.
that was authors in the emerging fields like unlearning and Barry O'Reilly, or it was other people's work and standing on their shoulders of peer-reviewed things like the brief resilience scale for resilience. So there's lots of embedded science and scientific models, regulatory focus theory, all sorts of different constructs that form our 15 subdimensions. And
Right.
those 15 subdimensions come up to the ACE model, ability, character, environment. And the reason we wanted these in, and actually it was less of a we want them in, it was more of a they emerged through the
Right.
research that these factors were really important to understand how, who, why, and what's often forgotten in a lot of assessments is when, the environment that people operate. So it was through the curiosity, it was through following the research and science that these three master dimensions emerged. And if anyone's really interested to geek out in this, we do, as you've just been through, we certify and train people in our model. It's now interestingly being taught in several universities around the world, this model.
Wow.
But we've
That's good.
gathered hundreds of scientific research papers that underpin each of these subdimensions that we have accessible in some of our knowledge platforms and things like that. So if someone wants to geek out, get on one of our certifications and then access loads of the scientific work that we've gathered over many years.
Yeah, sure. And you also got incorporated few predictive indexes, right? Recently.
Yes. Yeah. So these are different in terms of each one of those distinct subdimensions that I was mentioning, like grit, resilience, psychological safety. Some I've not mentioned as some of the character ones, who adapts and why, things like emotional range, which is based on the science of neuroticism, or extroversion, or motivation style. So this is, do I play to protect or play to win? Regulatory focus theory. Now, you mentioned we've got some predictive indexes. So what we do is take elements from and results from those subdimensions, and we're creating two predictive indexes. One is change readiness, and the other one is reskill index. So those are weighted mapped matrix of those subdimensions. So we might take elements of unlearn plus elements of mindset plus elements of mental flexibility plus elements of some others that will help form a change readiness index and give us a score and give us some insights for that individual or for that team on how ready they are for change or how capable they might be to reskill based on these underlying adaptability skills. We also have a couple of others around adaptive behaviors, particularly around innovation. This is explore and transform and utilize and improve, but they are distinct subdimensions by themselves as opposed to indexes. So there's certainly plenty for people to spend a lifetime, and I think I will, learn about and working to develop.
Sure. And the model that we are used for this is, input, process, output. Outcome. Sorry, not output. We call it outcome, not an output. So in that way, all the 17 parameters, can we say like those are all inputs and the adaptive behaviors are all process? Ross, would it be right to say that?
Yeah, so it can function in a few different ways in terms of this input process, outcome, outputs, in terms of the design of the model and then the use of the model. So in the use of the model, they can be inputs. A process could then be an intervention, could be coaching, could be a debrief, could be training. And then the outcome that we want could be increased innovation. It could be increased engagement. It could be reduced stress as an outcome. That would then give us another, in the feedback loop, another input of whether it worked or not. And it will then adjust perhaps some of those results from, the 17 subdimensions. What we could also look at is the model design itself. So whilst that's it functioning in work as a input, process and outcome, in the model itself, we can think of things like the abilities as our input. We can think about character as the process, the way in which somebody responds, my level of extroversion, for example, not good or bad, but that's a process I go through as to my character traits.
Right.
And equally, our environment, that's another input. So to a certain extent, we can have elements also as outcomes that are linked to business outcomes or an outcome that's affecting team support. It's affecting the emotional health of the environment as an outcome of my skills and character. So it gets even more complex that in itself, in its own isolated bubble, it can follow an input, process, outcome of the ability, character, and environment, because we're both subject to and subject of our environment, right? We can contribute to it as well. And likewise, all of it can become an input when we take it into a work context of getting work done as well.
Wow. So definitely, adaptability is the current as well as the future need, definitely, Ross. How do you see, especially with the advent of technological interventions that's happening parallelly, especially AI is now taking a lot of space in our leadership, discourse. So how do you think AQ is getting fitted into this ecosystem?
So I think, somebody I follow, a chap called Peter Diamandis, he talks about there'll be two types of companies in 2030. There'll be the companies that embraced AI, and there'll be the companies that no longer exist. And for him, it's as stark as that.
Okay.
Now, the ones that will survive by 2030 in the entirely new way in which we function, create value, get work done, the link and pathway to that is our adaptability. Humans' adaptability to be able to embrace opportunities, mitigate risks, respond intentionally, less reactions, that might harm us physically, emotionally, in our relationships and in our marketplace. So I think the pace of change is the slowest today we will ever experience it. It's only going to get faster.
My God. Okay.
Right. So we're going to see, the shift from SaaS, software as a solution, to RaaS, of result as a service. So, AI agents that we just ask for the result and it will deliver that result. Book me the flight, book me the tickets. These are easy wins currently, and they'll get the end result. It's not a co-pilot where it enhances a human. It does the entire task end to end. And I truly believe there will be a state in which the majority of tasks will be capable by AI in work. So where we think, creativity, or we try to hold on to these human areas of empathy, of emotion, of all of these things, a lot of it is still decodable as patterns and pattern recognitions. And so it's going to be vast, this disruption. So it's absolutely critical for leaders and organizations to really understand their adaptability, learn it, improve it like a muscle, to ensure they're relevant, ensure they're not left behind. And when there are these swathes of transitions where current job roles and job tasks, what we want to shift from people redundancies to task redundancies, so that we can re-engineer opportunities and futures for people in an ethical way that allows them to still contribute, allows them to still feel valued, allows them to still build mastery, creativity, all of those sorts of things. So it is essential. It's absolutely critical that leaders and organizations embrace this right now. There's a simple choice. If you don't, then it will do it for you, right? You'll go into collapse, and hopefully you'll avoid dark rooms and sharp objects. Some people won't. That's the reality of it. That's why this work is so critical. And they'll go to survival, and hopefully many do that quickly, and it won't take long, and they won't live in survival for too long. But the reality is these things will happen, and it'll be the AQ and our adaptability intelligence that will help us navigate this better.
Yeah, great. See, and for all this work, research, we have been seeing research is one of the strongest pillars of AQ model. Russ, as a person who is experiencing it, I can vouch for it. And how are you planning to intensify the research so that we stay contemporary and responsive to the emerging needs?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ramesh. And I've kind of got a few workflows and thought threads going on in my mind around that of research. AQ is still early, right? Some of these others you mentioned, IQ, been around a long time, EQ, 3 decades, long time. And there's a lot of adoption and awareness. And with data, you can then do more with it. AQ was still early doors in terms of getting the volume of data points, assessment completions, companies adopting it across different cultures, different industries, so that we can do more research. We can put together more data, more benchmarks, more reports, share that with the world so that they can put those interventions in place for, disruptive disruption, for creative disruption, for positive disruption, ultimately transformation. And that comes from having that data and that research. So one is we are planning to intensify it by more adoption and more data in it. We're launching a huge global research project this year for leaders. We're sponsoring 10,000 results, so $1 million fund for organizations to apply for, where they can put 20 leaders through and get their AQME assessments. And that will form by the end of the year a big report and benchmark study with some academic partners around leadership adaptability. So one is increasing the data that we have. The other part is a bit like a sports team, Ramesh, where you have a bench, you have a squad, and those that are on the field are the best for the game right now. The subdimensions in the model we have is the best we know right now. There are other data points that I'd love to integrate with our model that I know are critical to adaptability. Things like sleep. I know that my ability to, respond, overreact, to learn or not learn, to unlearn is impacted by my sleep level. So what we want to do is, where we have these subdimensions and it's a self-assessed assessment currently, is over time build our bench of other data sources. You mentioned 360s. How might we add 360 data in? How might we add sleep data in? I wear an Oura ring, have done for 6.5 years, that measures my heart rate variability, my breathing rate, my skin temperature, my, sleeping. All of those things will be fascinating data to append and look for correlations, look for impacts on our adaptability in work. So as we become more accessible and connected to different data pools, so lots of data exists in different silos, different people's, competitive IP. What we want to do is expand our data and collate other data into it, so we can append that with sleep, with other information, with other assessments, self-assessments, so that we can form a more wide approach of understanding how, who, why, and when we adapt, so that no one's left behind.
Yeah, great. With so much of research and, of course, with the noble vision of no one is left behind. How are you developing your talent pool to champion this cause, Ross? I would call it a cause. So how are you developing your talent pool and how are you supporting it?
Yeah, so our talent pool as an organization, there's another great alliteration of build, borrow, and buy in terms of talent. So building talent, how do we develop our existing team? How do we borrow? So through collaborations and partnerships. And how do we buy, right? Bring on new resources. Now, in the previous paradigm, when I was an entrepreneur in some of my first business endeavors, often that was humans, right? It's human people. And your talent pool was thought of as humans. And you would think, how can we attract them to our nice, location, give them nice food, have bean bags, whatever it might be, perks, and good jobs, good opportunities, good development opportunities and learning. And then we expanded to a global talent pool with remote work and hybrid work. Well, whilst we're doing that and heavily investing in skills development as a whole team, we've just gone through a NeuroChange Solutions program of development. We really do this ourselves, is through talent on demand. So we have a network of over 400 certified partners across 40 countries. So as we're doing projects, as we're doing work with different clients, we deploy those in to help serve the client needs. We're also using many different AI agents internally to augment our current human work, but will also replace some human work and tasks. So we're building out agents that can do tasks for us. A lot of the mundane things we do, we've got a lot of fragmented data, we've got a lot of fragmented, reporting, and it's a pain in the ass to pull it all together. that's where technology should do it. So our talent
Yeah.
pool, I consider not just our core team or our talent on demand of our certified partners or our wider partners of talent, which might be channel partners, distributors, but also our technology partners, I see as our talent pool. And I think that evolving solution where we will have 5 or 6 agents per person doing roles for us, assistant roles, thinking collaborator roles, playing, devil's advocate, new perspectives roles, all of these things, coaching roles, development roles through AI agents, I see as what we're investing in to expand our talent pool.
Wow, great. And I'm also feeling happy and glad. Like I am also playing a small role in your journey of making leaving no one behind. And thanks a lot, Russ. Thanks a lot for all the insights. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
It's been a real pleasure. And I just want to say your preparation and diligence to setting this up. I've been on lots of podcasts. It was truly excellent, Ramesh. It enabled us to really focus in, and I hope your listeners got value from what was shared. And if anyone wants to reach out, catch me on LinkedIn, also aqai.io, and contact him through Ramesh for his experiences with us as we expand out in the coming years and decades ahead.
Thanks a lot, Russ. Thank you very much.